The rifle shot cracked through the Wyoming valley and shattered the window above Hannah Kirkwood's head, sending glass fragments into her embroidery hoop like deadly rain. She dropped to the floor of her small cabin outside Wheatland, her heart hammering against her ribs as another shot punched through the door. The lamp on her table flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows across the unfinished wildflowers she had been stitching onto linen. Her hands trembled as she crawled toward the corner where her father's old shotgun leaned against the wall. She had loaded it that morning, like she did every morning since her father died 3 months ago, but she had never actually fired it at another human being. A third shot whistled through the already broken window. Hannah pressed herself against the rough log wall, breathing hard. The Brennan boys. It had to be them. They had been circling her property like vultures ever since they learned her father was dead, making threats about the water rights her land held. The creek that ran through her 20 acres was the only reliable water source for miles during the dry season, and the Brennan ranch had been eyeing it for years. "Miss Kirkwood," a voice called out from the darkness beyond her cabin. "Come on out and let's talk business." She recognized that voice. Chet Brennan, the eldest of 3 brothers who ran their family ranch with iron fists and loose morals. Hannah clutched the shotgun tighter. Her father had warned her about men like him before he passed. "They'll smile while they steal from you," he had said, his weathered face grave with concern. "Don't trust a word that comes from their mouths." "I told you before, I am not selling," Hannah shouted back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "This is my land and I am keeping it." Laughter echoed in response. "That's a damn shame, Miss Kirkwood. Real shame. Pretty woman like you all alone out here. Dangerous world for a woman without protection." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Hannah swallowed hard and checked the shotgun one more time. 2 shells. That was all she had within reach. The rest were in the storage chest across the room, might as well have been in Denver for all the good they did her now. She heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside, more than one set. They were getting closer. Her mind raced through her options. She could shoot through the door, but then she would be down to 1 shell, and she had no idea how many of them were out there. She could wait for them to break in and shoot them at close range, but the thought of actually killing someone made her stomach turn. Then she heard something else. Hoofbeats coming fast from the south. More of them. Her heart sank. "What the hell?" Chet Brennan's voice came again, but this time it was confused rather than threatening. "Evening, gentlemen," a new voice called out, deep and steady. "Little late for a social call, is it not?" Hannah carefully lifted her head to peek through the broken window. In the moonlight, she could make out 4 figures near her well. 3 of them she recognized by their builds. The Brennan boys. The 4th was a stranger on horseback, tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low. Even in the dim light, she could see he wore 2 revolvers on his belt. "This does not concern you, friend," Chet said, and Hannah heard the warning in his tone. "Best keep riding." "Well, see, that is where you are wrong," the stranger said, and she heard him shift in his saddle. "Any man who shoots at a woman's home in the dead of night concerns me greatly, so I am going to have to ask you boys to head on home now." "There are 3 of us," one of the younger Brennans spoke up, his voice thin and reedy. "I can count," the stranger replied. "Do you want to find out if that matters?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Hannah held her breath, her finger resting on the shotgun's trigger. She could see the Brennan boys shifting nervously. They were bullies, she knew, the kind who preyed on those they perceived as weak. But this stranger did not sound weak. He sounded like a man who had been in situations like this before and walked away alive. "This is not over," Chet finally said. "Come on, boys." Hannah watched as the 3 figures mounted their horses and rode off into the darkness. She stayed pressed against the wall, not trusting it, not trusting anything. The stranger remained where he was, his horse standing still as a statue. "Miss," he called out, "they are gone now, you can come out." "How do I know you are not worse than they are?" Hannah responded, keeping the shotgun trained on the door. She heard what might have been a chuckle. "Fair question. Name is Quincy Crawford. I was riding through on my way to Cheyenne when I heard the shots. Thought someone might need help. Was I wrong?" Hannah considered this. His voice did not have that cruel edge the Brennan boys carried, but her father had also taught her to be cautious. "What were you doing riding through this late at night? Prefer traveling when it is cooler," he said. "And I like looking at the stars. Are you hurt, miss?" "No," she said. "But my window is broken." "I noticed that. Those men have a dispute with you. They want my water rights," Hannah said, still not moving from her position. "I told them no, they took it poorly. Men like that usually do." There was a pause. "Miss, I mean you no harm. But I would like to make sure your property is secure before I move on. Would that be acceptable to you?" Hannah weighed her options. She was exhausted from the adrenaline crash. Her hands were shaking, and the thought of being alone again suddenly seemed unbearable. But she was also her father's daughter, raised to be smart about survival. "You can check the perimeter," she finally said, "but I will be watching you with this shotgun the whole time." "Would not expect anything less," he said, and this time she definitely heard approval in his voice. She watched through the broken window as he dismounted and walked a slow circle around her cabin, his hand never far from his revolvers. He moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own body, checking the corners and the tree line with practiced efficiency. When he came back to the front, he stopped a respectful distance from the door. "All clear," he said. "Though I would recommend boarding up that window tonight. Do you have spare planks in the barn?" Hannah said. "I can manage it myself." "I am sure you can," he said. "But it would go faster with 2 sets of hands, and those men might decide to come back once they think I am gone." He was right, much as she hated to admit it. Hannah took a deep breath and slowly stood up, keeping the shotgun pointed at the floor but ready. She walked to the door and opened it a crack, getting her first clear look at Quincy Crawford. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 25 or 26 to her 22 years. His face was sun-weathered and honest, with strong features and dark eyes that met hers directly without challenge or aggression. His brown hair curled slightly where it touched his collar, and dust covered his clothes from travel. He held his hands away from his guns, palms open. "Miss Kirkwood, I presume," he said. "How did you know my name?" "Those men used it. I have a good memory." He glanced at the broken window. "May I help you board that up? Then I will be on my way." Something in his straightforward manner made Hannah decide to trust him, at least for now. She nodded and stepped out onto her small porch, the shotgun still in her hands. "The barn is this way." They worked in silence at first, Hannah holding the lamp while Quincy measured and cut the planks to fit the window frame. His movements were efficient and sure, and she found herself studying him in the lamplight. There was something quietly competent about him, the kind of man who knew how to do things and did them without fanfare. "You are handy with tools," she said as he hammered the first plank into place. "My father was a carpenter before he took to ranching," Quincy said. "I learned from him, though I am better with horses than wood, truth be told." "Are you a rancher then?" Lost our place in Colorado 2 years ago to a bank." He drove another nail in with 3 precise strikes. "Been working as a hired hand since, going where the work is." "I am sorry about your ranch," Hannah said softly. He shrugged. "Life has a way of changing plans. At least my parents did not live to see it. They passed the year before." They finished boarding the window in companionable quiet, and then Quincy helped her sweep up the broken glass from inside. Hannah found herself relaxing around him, though she kept the shotgun within reach. He never once made her feel threatened or uncomfortable, keeping his distance and his movements slow and predictable. "Thank you," she said when they were done. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Crawford." "Quincy is fine," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "And you are welcome." He glanced around the cabin, taking in the simple but neat furnishings, the embroidery hoop still sitting on the table where she had dropped it. "You live here alone?" "My father passed 3 months ago," Hannah said. "Heart gave out. It has just been me since then." "That is a hard thing," Quincy said. "My condolences." He hesitated. "Those men who were here tonight, they will likely be back, you know. Men like that do not give up easy, especially when there is something they want." "I know," Hannah said quietly, "but this land is all I have. My father worked himself to death to keep it. I will not just give it away because some bullies fire shots in the dark." Quincy studied her for a long moment, and she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. She might be scared, but she would not back down. "You have courage," he finally said. "But courage does not stop bullets." He seemed to come to some internal decision. "I was heading to Cheyenne looking for work, but work will still be there next week. What if I stayed on here for a few days, just until we can figure out a more permanent solution to your Brennan problem? You could use help around the place, and I could use the work." Hannah's first instinct was to refuse. Having a strange man staying on her property, even one who seemed decent, would cause talk in town. But then she thought about the cold fear she had felt when those bullets came through her window, about lying awake every night wondering if this would be the night the Brennans came back. "I cannot pay much," she said slowly. "Maybe $1 a day in meals, and you would have to sleep in the barn." "That is fair," Quincy said. "Better than sleeping under stars with no dinner. Do we have an accord?" Hannah extended her hand, and he shook it firmly. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip strong but not crushing. "We have an accord, Mr. Crawford." "Quincy," he corrected with a small smile. "I will get my horse settled and bed down. Is there anything urgent that needs doing tomorrow?" "The fence on the north pasture needs mending," Hannah said, "and I have to take eggs into town to sell. That is how I earn most of my money now, selling eggs and my embroidery work." "Embroidery?" Quincy glanced at the hoop on the table. "Is that what you were doing when those men showed up?" "Yes," Hannah said, walking over to pick it up carefully. The glass fragments had torn through one corner of the linen, but the rest was intact. She had been working on a pattern of prairie roses and meadowlarks, delicate work that took hours of patient stitching. "I sell finished pieces to the general store in Wheatland. Mrs. Chen displays them and ladies buy them for their homes." Quincy stepped closer to look at the piece, his eyes widening slightly. "That is beautiful work, very detailed." "Thank you," Hannah said, feeling a flush of pride. "My mother taught me before she died. It was her craft, too." "You are talented," Quincy said simply. "Well, I will let you get back to it or to sleep, whichever you prefer." "Good night, Miss Kirkwood." "Hannah," she said. "If you are going to be Quincy, I should be Hannah." He smiled, a real smile that lit up his face and made him look younger. "Good night then, Hannah." After he left, Hannah carefully repaired what she could of the damaged embroidery, her needle moving in the familiar patterns her mother had taught her as a child. But her mind was not on the stitching. It was on the stranger who had appeared out of the darkness like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. Quincy Crawford. She tested the name silently, wondering what twist of fate had brought him down her road at exactly the right moment. The next morning dawned clear and warm, the Wyoming sky stretching blue and endless overhead. Hannah woke early as always, built up the fire in her stove, and started making breakfast. She cooked more than usual, remembering she had someone else to feed. Eggs from her chickens, bacon from the pig she had butchered in the spring, and fresh biscuits with butter and jam. She was just pulling the biscuits from the oven when she heard Quincy outside, talking softly to the animals. Curious, she went to the window and saw him in her chicken yard, scattering feed while her hens clucked around his feet. He had already milked her cow and the bucket sat by the barn door, covered with a cloth to keep out flies. When he came to the door, his hat in his hands, she gestured him inside. "Breakfast is ready." "I appreciate it," he said, sitting where she indicated at her small table. "Your animals are well cared for." "I do my best," Hannah said, serving him a full plate. "It is just me, so I have to keep on top of everything." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Hannah found herself sneaking glances at him. In the full daylight, she could see he had a scar along his jaw, old and faded, and his hands bore the marks of hard work. But his table manners were good, and he ate with appreciation rather than just shoveling food down. "This is excellent," he said. "Best biscuits I have had in months." "I am glad you like them," Hannah said. "After we finish, I need to gather the eggs for town. Then I thought we could work on that fence." "Sounds good," Quincy said. He hesitated. "If you are going into town, I should probably ride with you. Those Brennan boys might be watching the roads." Hannah had not thought of that, and the realization sent a chill through her. "You think they would try something in broad daylight?" "Depends on how badly they want your land," Quincy said. "But better safe than sorry." So after breakfast, they loaded the eggs carefully into crates, along with 2 finished embroidery pieces Hannah had completed the week before. Quincy saddled his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Scout, and they set off toward Wheatland together, Hannah driving her father's old wagon. The town was just starting to wake up when they arrived, shopkeepers opening their doors and sweeping their porches. Hannah drove straight to Chen's general store, where Mrs. Margaret Chen greeted her warmly. "Hannah, dear, I was hoping you would come today. Mrs. Patterson bought your last piece, the one with the bluebonnets, and she has been asking if you have more." Mrs. Chen was a round, cheerful woman whose family had come from China 2 decades ago to work on the railroad. She and her husband now ran the most successful store in Wheatland, and they treated Hannah like family. "I have 2 new ones," Hannah said, carefully unwrapping them. One showed a mountain landscape with pines and eagles, the other a domestic scene of a cabin with flowers around the door. "Oh, these are lovely." Mrs. Chen examined them closely. "Your stitching just keeps getting better. I can give you $5 each for these." It was a good price, and Hannah accepted gratefully. While Mrs. Chen went to get the money, Quincy looked around the store with interest, studying the shelves stocked with everything from fabric to ammunition. "Your friend is new, Mrs. Chen said quietly when she returned with the money, glancing at Quincy with curious but kind eyes. "He is staying on to help with some work," Hannah said, not wanting to spread the story of last night around town. But Mrs. Chen was sharp. "The Brennan boys causing trouble again?" she asked, her voice dropping. Hannah hesitated, then nodded. "They came by last night, fired shots." Mrs. Chen's face darkened. "Those men are poison. Chen and I have been trying to get the sheriff to do something about them for years, but Sheriff Dawson always says he needs proof." She glanced at Quincy again. "I am glad you have someone watching over you. That is smart." "He seems like a good man," Hannah said softly. "Does he now?" Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly. "Well, bring him over here. Anyone helping you is a friend of mine." Hannah called Quincy over and made introductions. Mrs. Chen shook his hand firmly and studied him with the same assessing gaze she used to judge the quality of her merchandise. "You are staying at the Kirkwood place?" she asked directly. "Yes, madam," Quincy said. "Helping out with some repairs and such." "Good," Mrs. Chen said. That girl has been alone too long, and those Brennan brothers have been circling like wolves. You seem capable. You know how to use those guns." "Yes, madam." "Hopefully you will not have to," Mrs. Chen said. "But I feel better knowing Hannah has someone there. You make sure you take care of her." "I intend to, madam," Quincy said, and something in his tone made Hannah's heart skip. They left the store with Hannah's money and a few supplies Mrs. Chen insisted they take, including extra ammunition and some hard candy. As they walked back to the wagon, Hannah saw people watching them from windows and doorways. She knew there would be talk. A young woman and a strange man living on the same property. But she found she did not care as much as she thought she would. Let them talk. At least she would be alive to hear it. As they were loading the wagon, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, well, Hannah Kirkwood, heard you had some excitement last night." She turned to find Chet Brennan standing there, his two brothers flanking him. They were all big men, muscular from ranch work, with cold eyes and cruel mouths. In the daylight, they looked even more menacing than they had in the dark. "Mr. Brennan," Hannah said coolly, moving closer to the wagon where the shotgun was hidden under a blanket. "That was unfriendly of you, sixing your guard dog on us," Chet said, his gaze sliding to Quincy. "We just wanted to have a conversation." "Shooting at someone's house is not how you start a conversation," Quincy said evenly. He stood relaxed, but Hannah could see he was ready for trouble, his hands hanging loose near his guns. "Was not shooting at anyone," Chet said. "Just trying to get her attention." "You got it," Hannah said. "And my answer is still no, I am not selling." Chet's jaw tightened. "You are being foolish, girl. That land is too much for a woman alone. Let us make you a fair offer." "Your offers are never fair," Hannah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I am not alone. So I think you should leave now." "Come on, Chet," one of his brothers muttered, glancing nervously at Quincy. "People are watching." Indeed, several townspeople had stopped to observe the confrontation, including Sheriff Dawson, who stood on the steps of his office across the street, his thumbs hooked in his belt. Chet saw the sheriff and forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "This is not over, Hannah. You will see reason eventually, and your hired gun here will not be around forever." He tipped his hat mockingly and walked away, his brothers following. Hannah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Are you all right?" Quincy asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "Thank you for being here." "Always," he said, and the simple word felt like a promise. They drove back to the ranch in silence, both lost in thought. When they arrived, Quincy helped her unload the supplies, and then they went to work on the fence. It was hot, dusty labor, but Hannah found she enjoyed it. Quincy was easy to work beside, not talking unless there was something to say, his presence comforting rather than intrusive. As the afternoon wore on, they settled into a rhythm. He would point out what needed doing, ask her opinion, then they would do it together. He did not treat her like she was helpless or stupid, and he did not try to take over her ranch. He simply helped like a partner. When the sun started sinking toward the mountains, they returned to the cabin. Hannah made dinner while Quincy tended the animals. She found herself humming as she cooked, something she had not done since her father died. There was something comforting about having someone else there, about not being alone. Over dinner, they talked more than they had before. Quincy told her about growing up in Colorado, about learning to break horses with his father, about the ranch they had lost. Hannah told him about her childhood in Missouri, about moving to Wyoming with her parents when she was 10, about her mother teaching her to embroider by lamplight during the long winter evenings. "You ever think about going back to Missouri?" Quincy asked. "Sometimes," Hannah admitted. "But this is home now. My parents are buried here. My father's dream is here. I cannot just walk away from that." "That takes courage," Quincy said. A lot of people would have given up and gone back east. I thought about it, Hannah said honestly. After Father died, I thought about selling everything and buying a train ticket. But then I realized I would hate myself if I did. This land is part of me now, Quincy nodded. I understand that. I felt the same way about our ranch. Still do, truth be told. But sometimes life does not give us a choice. It gave you a choice last night, Hannah said. You could have ridden past, but you stopped. That was not really a choice, Quincy said. When you hear shots in the dark and a woman in danger, you stop. That is just being human. After dinner, while Quincy was outside checking the animals one final time, Hannah returned to her embroidery. She had started a new piece that morning, one that had been forming in her mind since Quincy arrived. She sketched it first in pencil on the linen. A scene of the prairie at sunset with a lone rider on a buckskin horse, approaching a cabin with lamplight in the windows. She was just starting the first stitches when Quincy came back in to say goodnight. He stopped when he saw what she was working on, his eyes widening. Is that? He started. You, Hannah finished. Last night, how I saw you when you arrived. I hope you do not mind. Quincy stared at the sketch for a long moment. No one has ever made art of me before, he said quietly. I am honored. You saved my life, Hannah said. That seems worth commemorating. Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them, unspoken but powerful. Hannah felt her cheeks warm and looked away first, returning her attention to the embroidery. Good night, Hannah, Quincy said softly. Good night, Quincy. The days settled into a pattern after that. Quincy would wake early and tend the animals while Hannah made breakfast. They would eat together, plan the day's work, then spend the daylight hours repairing and maintaining the ranch. In the evenings after dinner, Quincy would sit in the chair across from her and clean his guns or mend tack while she embroidered by lamplight. They talked about everything and nothing. Their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Quincy told her about the places he had traveled, the things he had seen. Hannah told him about the embroidery patterns she wanted to try, the improvements she wanted to make to the ranch. The more they talked, the more Hannah felt drawn to him. He was kind and funny and smart, with a quiet strength that made her feel safe. The Brennans did not come back, but Hannah knew they were still a threat. She heard from Mrs. Chen on her weekly trips to town that they were asking around about Quincy, trying to find out how long he planned to stay. The question hung between Hannah and Quincy too, unspoken but present. 1 week passed, then 2. The fence was repaired, the barn roof was patched, the chicken coop was reinforced. The list of necessary work grew shorter, and as it did, Hannah felt a growing dread. Soon there would be nothing left that needed urgent attention. And then Quincy would have no reason to stay. She tried not to think about it, tried to focus on each day as it came. But her heart was already ahead of her mind, already mourning what she would lose when he left. It was 3 weeks after his arrival that things came to a head. Hannah was working on the embroidery of Quincy arriving at her cabin, the piece nearly finished now. She had captured him perfectly, she thought, the way he sat his horse with easy confidence, the protective set to his shoulders. She was adding the final details to Scout's reins when Quincy came in from his evening rounds, his face troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "Found fresh tracks around the property line," he said. "Someone has been watching the place." Hannah set down her embroidery, her heart sinking. "The Brennans, most likely, 3 horses by the tracks. They have been coming by every few days, it looks like, checking to see if I am still here." He sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Hannah, I think it is time we talked about what happens next." "What do you mean?" But she knew what he meant. She had been dreading this conversation. "I have been here 3 weeks," Quincy said. "The urgent work is done. Those men are waiting for me to leave, and I cannot stay here forever." He paused. "Unless you want me to." Hannah's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I came here planning to stay a few days, and somehow those few days turned into the best 3 weeks of my life," Quincy said. "I am saying that I wake up every morning looking forward to seeing you at breakfast. I am saying that watching you embroider by lamplight has become my favorite part of every day." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Hannah Kirkwood, and if you will have me, I would like to stay not as hired help but as your husband." The words hung in the air between them, stunning in their directness. Hannah stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Quincy," she whispered. "I know it is fast," he said. "I know you barely know me, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are strong and brave and talented and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life protecting you and supporting your dreams and watching you create beautiful things." He took a shaky breath. "So what do you say? Will you marry me?" Hannah realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you because I love you too. I have loved you since that first night when you appeared out of the darkness like an answer to a prayer. I have loved you through every sunrise and every shared meal and every quiet evening by lamplight. Yes, Quincy Crawford, I will marry you." He was out of his chair in an instant, pulling her up and into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that was sweet and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and grinning. "When?" Quincy asked. "When should we marry?" "As soon as possible," Hannah said. "I do not want to wait, do you?" "Not even a little bit," he said, kissing her again. They rode into Wheatland the next morning and went straight to see Reverend Matthews, who agreed to marry them that Sunday after regular services. Word spread through the small town like wildfire, and by the time they left to go back to the ranch, half the town knew that Hannah Kirkwood was marrying her mysterious cowboy. Mrs. Chen cornered them at the general store, her eyes bright with tears. "I am so happy for you both," she said, hugging Hannah tightly. "You deserve happiness, dear girl, and you," she turned to Quincy, "you better take good care of her or you will answer to me and Chen both." "I will treat her like the treasure she is," Quincy promised. "You have my word." They spent the next few days preparing for the wedding. It would be simple, just them and a few townspeople who had become Hannah's friends after her father died. Hannah worked on a new dress, sewing late into the night, while Quincy cleaned up their cabin and built a proper bed frame to replace the rope bed she had been using. On Saturday evening, the night before the wedding, they sat together by lamplight one last time as an unmarried couple. Hannah was finishing the embroidery of Quincy's arrival, adding the last few stitches. "There," she said, holding it up. "What do you think?" Quincy studied it with wonder. She had captured that night perfectly, the lamplight glowing in the cabin window, him on scout approaching cautiously, the vast dark prairie around them. Along the border, she had embroidered their names and the date. "The night Quincy Crawford embroidered himself into my story. September 15, 1883. "It is perfect," he said quietly. "I want to hang it over our bed so we always remember how we began." "I would like that," Hannah said. Quincy reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Are you nervous? About tomorrow?" "A little," Hannah admitted. "Not about marrying you, about everything changing." "It does not have to change that much," Quincy said. "We will still have breakfast together, still work together during the day, still sit by lamplight in the evenings. The only difference is I will be sleeping in the house instead of the barn, and I will have the legal right to protect you and this land." "And we will be together," Hannah said, Really together as husband and wife? Yes, Quincy said, his voice deepening. That too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, hands clasped, watching the lamp flame dance. Then Quincy stood to go to the barn one last time as an unmarried man. Tomorrow night, I will not have to leave, he said. Tomorrow night, everything will be different, Hannah agreed, smiling up at him. The wedding was beautiful despite its simplicity. Hannah wore her new dress, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs, her hair pinned up with her mother's combs. Quincy wore his best clothes, pressed and clean, his dark hair neatly combed. They stood before Reverend Matthews in the small wooden church and exchanged vows, their voices strong and sure. I, Quincy, take you, Hannah, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I, Hannah, take you, Quincy, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her tenderly, and the small gathering of townspeople erupted in applause. Mrs. Chen was crying openly, and even her stern husband Chen had tears in his eyes. After the ceremony, several of the townswomen had prepared a simple reception at the church hall. There was cake and punch, and people came up to offer their congratulations. Hannah noticed that not everyone from town was there. The Brennans, obviously. Sheriff Dawson had not come either, which disappointed her but did not surprise her. But the people who did come were the ones who mattered. Mrs. Chen and her husband, who had been so kind to Hannah. Old Mrs. Patterson, who bought her embroidery. The blacksmith Tom Henderson and his wife Sarah, who had helped Hannah when her father died. These were her true friends, and they were happy for her. As the afternoon wore on, Quincy kept Hannah close, his arm around her waist, his eyes never leaving her for long. She felt cherished and protected and deeply, profoundly happy. Finally, as the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon to head home. Home. The word had new meaning now. It was not just Hannah's cabin anymore. It was their cabin, their home, the place where they would build their life together. The ride back was quiet, both of them lost in thought and anticipation. When they arrived, Quincy helped Hannah down from the wagon, but instead of releasing her, he swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said. "It is tradition." He carried her into the cabin and set her down gently, then turned to light the lamps. The cabin glowed with warm light, and Hannah looked around with new eyes. Quincy had cleaned everything until it shone, and he had picked wildflowers and put them in jars around the room. On the table, he had set out some bread and cheese and a bottle of wine from the general store. "You did all this?" she asked, touched. "I wanted our first night as husband and wife to be special," he said. "You deserve special, Hannah." They ate a simple supper, both too nervous and excited to manage much. Then Quincy took her hand and led her to the new bed he had built, the embroidery of his arrival hanging on the wall above it just as he had promised. "I love you," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I will love you until my last breath." "I love you too," Hannah whispered. "Show me." And he did. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, awkward and beautiful, everything a first time should be. Afterward they lay in each other's arms, the lamp turned low, talking softly about their dreams for the future. "I want to breed horses," Quincy said. "Build a reputation for quality stock. I think we could do it on this land with the good water and grass." "I would like that," Hannah said. "And I want to keep doing my embroidery, maybe even teach other women if they want to learn." "You could do that," Quincy said. "You are good at it and patient. You would be a good teacher." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, safer and happier than either had been in years. The next morning, they woke to a pounding on the door. Quincy was up instantly, pulling on his pants and grabbing his gun. Hannah threw on her dressing gown and followed him to the door. "Who is it?" Quincy called out. "Tom Henderson, the blacksmith. You need to come quick." Quincy opened the door. Tom stood there, his face grim. "The Brennan boys are in town drunk and making threats. They are saying they are going to ride out here and settle things once and for all. I rode ahead to warn you." Quincy's jaw tightened. "How long do we have?" "Maybe an hour," Tom said. "They were still drinking when I left, but they were working themselves up to it." "Thank you for the warning," Quincy said. "You should get back to town, keep yourself out of it. Are you sure I can stay and help?" "I appreciate it, but this is between me and them," Quincy said. "No point in you getting hurt." Tom nodded reluctantly and rode off. Quincy shut the door and turned to Hannah, his face serious. "I need you to get dressed and get ready to ride. If things go badly, I want you to run for town and get help." "I am not leaving you," Hannah said firmly. "Hannah, no, Quincy. This is my fight as much as yours. This is my land they want, my home they threatened. We face this together." Quincy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. "All right. But you stay inside with the shotgun, and if I tell you to run, you run. Deal?" "Deal," Hannah lied. Knowing she would do no such thing, they dressed quickly and prepared for the confrontation. Quincy checked his revolvers and his rifle, making sure everything was loaded and ready. Hannah loaded the shotgun and her father's old pistol, her hands steady despite her racing heart. The Brennans arrived just as the sun cleared the mountains, 3 men on horseback, clearly still drunk from their night in town. They reined up in front of the cabin, and Chet Brennan shouted out, "Crawford, come on out." Quincy stepped onto the porch, his hands hanging loose near his guns. Hannah stood just inside the door, the shotgun ready. "Morning, boys," Quincy said calmly. "Little early for a social call." "We are done playing games," Chet slurred, swaying slightly in his saddle. "You are going to get out of here, and the woman is going to sell us her land, or we are going to burn you both out." "That is not going to happen," Quincy said. "Hannah is my wife now. This is our land legally, and we are not selling." "Your wife?" One of the younger Brennans laughed mockingly. "You married the uptight embroidery girl. Good luck with that." "Show some respect," Quincy's voice went hard. "That is my wife you are talking about, or what?" Chet sneered. "There are 3 of us and one of you. Do the math, Crawford." "I can count," Quincy said. "Can you?" His meaning was clear. 3 of them, 2 guns on his belt, a rifle leaning against the doorframe behind him, and Hannah with the shotgun inside. The odds were not as good as the Brennans thought, but they were too drunk and too angry to think clearly. Chet's hand dropped toward his gun, and everything happened at once. Quincy drew faster than Hannah would have thought possible, both revolvers clearing leather in a blur. She heard the sharp crack of gunfire, saw Chet rock backward in his saddle, blood blooming on his shoulder. The other 2 brothers went for their guns, but Quincy was already moving, firing again. One brother cried out and fell from his horse. The third, the youngest, got a shot off that went wild, shattering a post on the porch. Hannah burst through the door with the shotgun and fired into the air, the boom deafening. "Enough!" she shouted. The remaining Brennan brother froze, his gun half drawn. On the ground, his brother was clutching his leg and groaning. Chet sat on his horse, his good hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder, his face pale with shock and pain. "Next person who draws gets worse than a flesh wound," Quincy said, his voice deadly calm. His guns never wavered, trained on the men in front of him. "You have 2 choices. You can ride back to your ranch right now, tend your wounds and forget about this land. Or you can keep pushing, and I will make sure none of you ever threaten anyone again." "What will it be?" Chet looked at his brothers, one wounded on the ground, one frozen with fear on his horse. The math had changed. This was not 3 bullies terrorizing a lone woman anymore. This was 3 drunk idiots who had picked a fight with a man who knew how to use his guns and a woman who was not afraid to use a shotgun. "This is not over," Chet growled, but there was defeat in his voice. "Yes, it is," Quincy said. "Touch this land, threaten my wife again, and I will go to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne myself. I have witnesses to everything you have done. Tom Henderson will testify. Mrs. Chen will testify. Half the town will testify. You might have Sheriff Dawson in your pocket, but you do not own the marshal." It was a bluff, but it was a good one. The Brennans had gotten away with intimidation and threats because they worked in the shadows and scared people into silence. But Quincy had just dragged everything into the light. The youngest brother helped the wounded one onto his horse, and the 3 of them rode off without another word. Hannah and Quincy stood watching until they disappeared over the hill. "Are you all right?" Quincy asked, finally holstering his guns. "I think so," Hannah said. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Are you?" "Yes." He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "You were very brave, also very foolish for coming outside like that." "We are partners," Hannah said into his chest. "I meant what I said. We face things together." "I know," he said, "and I love you for it, but please never scare me like that again." They went back inside, and Quincy cleaned his guns while Hannah made coffee with trembling hands. Neither of them had much appetite for breakfast. An hour later, Tom Henderson came back with Sheriff Dawson and 3 other men from town. "We heard shots," Tom said. "Are you both all right?" "We are fine," Quincy said. "The Brennan boys came looking for trouble. They found it. I wounded 2 of them, but they will live." They rode off toward their ranch. Sheriff Dawson frowned. "That is a serious accusation, Crawford. What proof do you have?" "Proof?" Hannah stepped forward, her fear turning to anger. "They have been threatening me for months, Sheriff. They shot at my house. They came here drunk this morning making threats. There are witnesses to all of it, and you have done nothing." "Now, Miss Kirkwood, Mrs. Crawford," Hannah corrected sharply. "And I am tired of you doing nothing while those men terrorize this valley. Either you do your job, or we will go over your head to the territorial marshal. Your choice." The sheriff's face reddened, but the men from town were nodding in agreement. He could see which way the wind was blowing. "I will ride out to the Brennan place and get their side of the story," he finally said. "You do that," Quincy said. "And while you are at it, you can tell them that if they ever set foot on this property again, I will shoot first and answer questions later. I have the right to defend my wife and my home." After the sheriff and the others left, Hannah and Quincy sat together on the porch, exhausted and shaken, but alive, together, safe. "You think they will come back?" Hannah asked. "No," Quincy said. "I think they finally realized we are not going to be pushed around, and with the town knowing what they did, they will be more careful." He took her hand. "We are going to be all right, Hannah. I promise you that." She leaned against his shoulder, looking out at the land her father had died protecting, the land that was now theirs together. "I believe you." The weeks that followed were peaceful. The Brennans did not come back, though Hannah heard from Mrs. Chen that Chet and his brothers left town for a while, supposedly to visit family in Montana. Whether that was true or whether they were just avoiding the consequences of their actions, Hannah did not know and did not care. They were gone, and that was what mattered. She and Quincy settled into married life with surprising ease. They worked side by side during the day, he teaching her about horses, and she teaching him more about managing the chickens and the garden. In the evenings, they would sit together by lamplight, her embroidering while he read aloud from newspapers or books they borrowed from the reverend. One evening in late October, Hannah was working on a new piece while Quincy read to her about the new railroad expansion when he stopped mid-sentence. "Hannah," he said, "what are you embroidering?" She held up the piece, smiling at his expression. She had sketched a scene of the two of them working together on the fence, him holding the posts while she hammered nails, their faces turned toward each other, smiling. "Us," she said. "Building our life together." Quincy came over to look closer, his eyes soft. "You make us look heroic." "We are heroic," Hannah said. "We fought for this place for each other. That is heroic." He kissed her tenderly. "I love the way you see the world. I love you," she said simply. As winter set in, they prepared the cabin for the cold months ahead. Quincy split cords of wood for the stove while Hannah preserved vegetables and made quilts. They bought 2 more horses from a breeder in Cheyenne, starting the foundation of the breeding program Quincy dreamed of. On Christmas morning, Quincy gave Hannah a beautiful wooden embroidery box he had made himself, with compartments for all her threads and needles, and her name carved into the lid. She gave him a framed embroidery of Scout, his beloved horse, so detailed it looked almost alive. "These are the best gifts I have ever received," Quincy said, holding the embroidery up to the light. "You make magic with thread and needle." "You make magic with wood and leather," Hannah replied. "We are a good match." "The best match," he agreed, pulling her into his arms. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Hannah felt a peace she had never known before. Her father would have liked Quincy, she thought, would have approved of the way he treated her with respect and partnership, would have been proud of how they had defended the land together. "Are you happy?" Quincy asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Hannah said. "Are you?" "More than I have words to express," Quincy said. "When I rode down your road that night, I was lost. I had no home, no purpose, no direction. And then I found you, embroidering by lamplight, brave and beautiful and alone, and everything changed." "You embroidered yourself into my story," Hannah said, remembering the words she had stitched onto that first piece. "And you embroidered yourself into mine," Quincy said. "Forever." Spring came, and with it new life. The horses Quincy had bought in Cheyenne had foals, beautiful strong colts that he began training with patience and skill. Word spread about the quality of his work, and people started coming from other counties to see his horses. Hannah's embroidery business grew too. She began taking custom orders, creating pieces that told stories of the prairie and the people who lived there. She framed her piece of Quincy arriving at her cabin and hung it in the general store, where it drew so much attention that Mrs. Chen suggested she display more work there. By summer, they had saved enough money to make improvements to the cabin. They added a room for Hannah's embroidery work, with big windows for good light and shelves for her supplies. Quincy built her a proper workbench and a comfortable chair. It was her space, her sanctuary, where she could create beauty. One evening in August, nearly a year after they had married, Hannah called Quincy in from the barn earlier than usual. He came in to find her at her embroidery table, working on something new. "What is it?" he asked. She held up the piece, and he stopped breathing for a moment. It was a cradle, carefully stitched in detail, with a tiny blanket and a rattle. Above it, she had embroidered the words "Coming February 1885. "Hannah," he whispered, are we?" "We are going to have a baby," she said, her eyes shining with joy and a little bit of fear. "Are you happy?" Quincy was across the room in 3 strides, lifting her up and spinning her around carefully. "Happy? I am ecstatic. A baby, our baby." He set her down and immediately looked worried. "Should I have done that? Is spinning you around bad for the baby?" Hannah laughed, the sound bright and free. "I am fine, Quincy. The baby is fine. We are all fine." He knelt down in front of her and placed his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I am your father and I love you already. And your mother is the most amazing woman in the world, so you are very lucky." Hannah ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with emotion. This man, this good, kind, brave man, was her husband and the father of her child. Sometimes she still could not believe how blessed she was. The months of her pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Quincy built a cradle out of smooth pine, sanding it for hours until there was not a single rough edge. Hannah embroidered blankets and gowns and tiny caps. Mrs. Chen threw her a party at the general store, and the women of Wheatland showered her with gifts and advice. In February, during a gentle snowfall, Hannah went into labor. The midwife, old Mrs. Larson, who had delivered half the babies in the county, came to the cabin and stayed with her through the long night. Quincy paced outside, occasionally coming to the door to check on her, his face tight with worry every time Hannah cried out in pain. Finally, as the sun rose on a bright winter morning, a baby's cry split the air. Mrs. Larson opened the door, grinning. "You have a son, Mr. Crawford, a healthy, strong boy." Quincy rushed inside to find Hannah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in one of her embroidered blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Quincy, meet your son," she said. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face peeking out of the blanket. The baby had dark hair like his, but Hannah's delicate features. His eyes were closed, his little fists waving in the air. "He is perfect," Quincy whispered. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." They named him Samuel, after Hannah's father, with the middle name Thomas, after Tom Henderson, who had helped them so much. Samuel Thomas Crawford, born February 14, 1885, on a snowy morning in Wyoming. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, sleeping in his beautiful cradle and nursing well. Hannah marveled at how small he was, how precious, how miraculous. Quincy was a natural father, patient and gentle, rocking Samuel when he fussed and changing his diapers without complaint. When spring came and Samuel was 2 months old, Hannah returned to her embroidery work, though she had less time for it now. She created a piece to commemorate his birth, showing the three of them together, Quincy and Hannah looking down at the baby in their arms. She titled it "Our Complete Story" and hung it next to the other pieces chronicling their life together. One evening, with Samuel asleep in his cradle and the lamp burning low, Quincy and Hannah sat together in her workroom. She was stitching a new scene while he worked on a leather bridle for one of the horses. "You remember the first night we met?" Hannah asked. "Every detail," Quincy said. "I was riding past, heard shots, saw your lamplight through the broken window. I thought you might be hurt." "I thought you might be another threat," Hannah admitted. "But then I saw your face and I knew you were there to help." "Best decision I ever made stopping that night," Quincy said. "Changed my whole life." "Changed both our lives," Hannah said. She set down her embroidery and took his hand. "I was so alone, Quincy, so scared. I was trying to be brave, but inside I was terrified. And then you appeared like something out of a dream, and suddenly I was not alone anymore." "You were never alone," Quincy said. "Even before I came, you had courage and strength. I just helped you see it." "We helped each other," Hannah said. "That is what partners do." Years passed, measured in the growth of their son and the expansion of their ranch. Samuel grew from a baby to a toddler to a young boy, learning to ride before he could read, following his father around the ranch and asking endless questions. Quincy's reputation as a horse breeder grew, and people came from as far as Colorado and Montana to buy his stock. Hannah's embroidery became sought after across the territory. She taught other women in town, holding classes at the church hall once a week. She created a series of pieces documenting life on the Wyoming prairie, which were displayed at the Territorial Fair in Cheyenne and won first prize. When Samuel was 5, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, more confident. She knew what to expect, knew her body could do this. In November of 1890, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Margaret Rose after Mrs. Chen, whose given name was Margaret, and after the prairie roses, Hannah loved to embroider. Maggie, as they called her, had her mother's light hair and her father's dark eyes, and she came into the world wailing with indignation at the cold air. Samuel was delighted to be a big brother. He would sit by Maggie's cradle for hours, telling her stories about the horses and the chickens and the wide prairie sky. Quincy would watch them together, his arm around Hannah, both of them marveling at the family they had created. The Brennan boys never came back. Hannah heard they sold their ranch and moved to Oregon, though the rumors varied about why. She did not care. They were gone, and good riddance. Sheriff Dawson retired and was replaced by a younger man, Ben Foster, who actually did his job. The town of Wheatland grew, adding new businesses and families. The railroad came through, bringing more people and more opportunities. Through it all, Hannah and Quincy remained the same. Partners, lovers, best friends. Every evening that they could, they would sit together in her workroom, her embroidering while he worked on leather or read or just watched her with quiet contentment. She created embroidery after embroidery documenting their life. Samuel taking his first steps, Maggie's first smile, Quincy working with the horses, family dinners around their table, the changing seasons on their land. Each piece was a love letter, a way of holding on to the precious moments that made up a life. When Samuel was 10 and Maggie was 5, Hannah surprised Quincy with a new embroidery piece. It was the largest she had ever done, a full tapestry showing their cabin with all of them in front of it. Quincy and Hannah in the center, Samuel on Quincy's shoulders, Maggie holding Hannah's hand, the horses grazing in the background, the prairie stretching to the mountains. Along the bottom, she had stitched words that made Quincy's eyes fill with tears. The Crawford family, built on love, sustained by courage, blessed beyond measure. "It is beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are beautiful. This life we have made is beautiful." "It is," Hannah agreed. "And it all started with you riding down my road one September night, stopping when you heard shots in the dark. Embroidering myself into your story," Quincy said, echoing the words she had used on that very first piece. "And me embroidering myself into yours," Hannah said, "forever and always." More years passed. Samuel grew into a fine young man, skilled with horses like his father, but with his mother's artistic eye. He began drawing and painting, creating beautiful portraits of the horses and landscapes. Maggie was quick and clever, learning to read early and devouring every book she could get her hands on. The ranch prospered. Quincy and Hannah added more land, more horses, hired a few hands to help with the work. They built a proper barn and a larger house, though they kept the original cabin as Hannah's embroidery studio, preserving it exactly as it had been that first night. When Samuel turned 18, he told his parents he wanted to go to art school in Denver. Hannah was sad to see him go, but proud of his ambition. Quincy helped him pack his things and gave him one of the best horses from their stock. "Make us proud, son," Quincy said, gripping Samuel's shoulder. "I will, father," Samuel promised, "and I will come back. This is my home always." Maggie, 14 now and sharp as a tack, announced she wanted to be a teacher. Hannah enrolled her in the new high school in Wheatland, and Maggie threw herself into her studies with determination. One evening, after both children were in bed, Hannah and Quincy sat together in the original cabin, now warm and cozy with years of memories soaked into the walls. Hannah was working on an embroidery while Quincy watched her, the lamplight catching in her hair. "Do you remember sitting like this the first time?" he asked. "Me coming in to say good night, you working on that piece of me arriving." "I remember everything about those early days," Hannah said. "The fear, the uncertainty, the moment I realized I was falling in love with you." "When was that moment?" Quincy asked. "You never told me." Hannah set down her embroidery and thought back. "The morning after you first stayed, I watched you through the window feeding my chickens, and you were so gentle with them, talking to them softly. And I thought, this is a good man. A truly good man. And I knew I wanted you to stay forever." "I knew I loved you the first time I saw you embroider," Quincy said. "The way you focused so intently, creating beauty out of thread and fabric. The way your hands moved so surely. I thought, this woman knows who she is and what she is worth. And I wanted to be the man who protected that, who helped her dreams flourish." "You did that," Hannah said. "You gave me safety and partnership and love. You gave me our children and this life. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," Quincy said. He knelt beside her chair and took her hands. "You know what? I think we should renew our vows, have another ceremony, invite the whole town. Celebrate 20 years of marriage," Hannah smiled. 20 years next September. That sounds perfect." And so, on September 16, 1903, exactly 20 years after their first wedding, Hannah and Quincy Crawford stood before the whole town of Wheatland and renewed their vows. Samuel came home from Denver for the occasion, bringing a painting he had made of his parents as a gift. Maggie read a poem she had written about love and partnership. Mrs. Chen, now elderly but still sharp, attended with tears streaming down her face. "I, Quincy, take you, Hannah, again as my wife. I promise to continue loving you, honoring you, protecting you, and cherishing you for all the days of my life. I, Hannah, take you, Quincy, again as my husband. I promise to continue loving you, honoring you, supporting you, and cherishing you for all the days of my life." The kiss they shared was no less sweet than the one they had shared 20 years before, and the applause was even louder. That evening, back in their original cabin, Hannah presented Quincy with a new embroidery. This one showed their entire story, from that first night when he rode up to her cabin, through their wedding, the birth of their children, all the moments that had made up their life together. In the center, larger than the rest, was an image of the two of them sitting by lamplight, him watching her embroider, the lamp casting a warm glow over them both. And beneath it all, words that captured everything. He found her embroidering by lamplight. The cowboy embroidered himself into her story, and together they stitched a life of love. Quincy held the embroidery with shaking hands, unable to speak for several long moments. When he finally looked up at Hannah, his eyes were swimming with tears. "This is perfect," he managed. "You are perfect. This life is perfect." "Not perfect," Hannah said, taking his hand. "Real. Ours. Hard-won and precious." They sat together as they had so many thousands of times before, the lamp burning steady, the Wyoming night stretching vast and star-filled around their cabin. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. More years rolled by like the seasons. Samuel finished art school and returned to Wheatland, where he opened a studio and taught art to the local children. He married a sweet girl named Emma from Denver, and they built a house near the Crawford Ranch. In time, they had children of their own, 2 daughters and a son. Maggie became a teacher, just as she had dreamed, teaching at the Wheatland schoolhouse. She married later, at 28, to a lawyer named Daniel who treated her like the treasure she was. They had twins, a boy and a girl. Hannah and Quincy became grandparents 5 times over, and their house was always full of noise and laughter when the grandchildren came to visit. Quincy taught them all to ride, just as he had taught Samuel and Maggie. Hannah taught them embroidery and quilting, passing down the skills her mother had taught her. The ranch continued to thrive. Quincy's horses were known throughout Wyoming and beyond. Hannah's embroidery pieces were displayed in galleries in Denver and even sent to exhibitions back east. Together, they had built something that would last beyond their lifetimes. One autumn evening, when Hannah was 60 and Quincy was 64, they sat together in the original cabin as they always did. Hannah's hands were not as steady as they once were, and her eyes were not as sharp, but she could still embroider. She was working on a piece for their newest grandchild, Samuel's daughter, who had been born that spring. "You ever regret it?" Quincy asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going back east where life might have been easier?" Hannah looked up, surprised. "Regret it? Quincy, this life has been everything I ever wanted and more. How could I regret it? The hard times," he said. "The fear in those early days, the isolation, the work." "The hard times made us strong," Hannah said. "The fear taught us courage. The isolation brought us closer. And the work gave us purpose." She set down her embroidery and took his hand. "I would not change a single thing." "Would you?" "Not one thing," Quincy said. "Except maybe I wish I had met you sooner, so we could have had even more years together." "We have had 40 years," Hannah said. "And God willing, we will have many more." They did have more years. Not as many as they might have hoped, but good years nonetheless. They watched their grandchildren grow, attended their school plays and recitals, celebrated birthdays and holidays. When Quincy was 70, he took sick with pneumonia during a harsh winter. Hannah nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside embroidering to keep her hands busy while she prayed. He recovered, but he was never quite as strong afterward. Still, they had their evenings together, their lamplight conversations, their quiet companionship. And that was enough. More than enough. On a warm September evening, Quincy asked Hannah to take a walk with him. They strolled slowly around their property, looking at everything they had built together. The big barn Quincy had constructed, the expanded house, the fences marking their boundaries, the pastures where horses grazed peacefully in the golden light. "I was just thinking," Quincy said, "about the first time I saw this place, how small and vulnerable it seemed, how brave you were defending it all alone." "I was terrified," Hannah admitted. "You were magnificent," Quincy corrected, "and you still are." They walked back to the original cabin and sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains they had looked at together for more than 40 years. "Read to me," Hannah said. "From your favorite passage." Quincy knew what she meant. He retrieved the Bible that had been his mother's, the one he had carried in his saddlebag that first night, and turned to 1 Corinthians. He read the familiar words about love being patient and kind, about how love never fails, his voice steady and sure. When he finished, Hannah leaned against his shoulder. "That is us," she said. "That is what we built." "Yes," Quincy agreed. "That is exactly what we built." As the stars came out, one by one, they sat together in the gathering darkness, the lamp in the cabin window glowing warm behind them. And if anyone had ridden past that night, they would have seen an old couple sitting close together, holding hands, looking out at the land they had fought for and loved and made their own. Years continued their steady march. Quincy passed when he was 76, peacefully in his sleep after a good day working with the horses. Hannah was beside him when he went, holding his hand, whispering that she loved him. The whole town turned out for his funeral. People spoke of his kindness, his skill with horses, his devotion to his family. Samuel gave a eulogy that left no one with dry eyes. Maggie read a poem. Hannah sat quiet and dry-eyed through it all, her grief too deep for tears. After the funeral, She went to the original cabin and sat in her usual chair. For the first time in more than 40 years, the chair across from her was empty. The silence was unbearable. But then she picked up her embroidery, the piece she had been working on before Quincy died. And slowly, stitch by stitch, she began to work again, creating beauty even in grief, honoring him the way she knew best. She lived for 5 more years after Quincy passed, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She taught them all to embroider, passing down the skills and the stories. She created one final piece in those years, showing Quincy on his horse Scout, riding toward a sunrise, free and young and strong. On a cool spring morning, Hannah did not wake up. She died peacefully in her sleep, in the bed Quincy had built for their wedding, surrounded by the embroideries that told their story. They buried her next to Quincy on a hilltop overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Samuel and Maggie stood together, their own children and grandchildren around them, mourning the woman who had been the heart of their family. In her will, Hannah left the original cabin to Samuel, with instructions that it be preserved as she and Quincy had kept it. The embroideries that told their story were to stay in the cabin, hung on the walls where anyone could see them and remember. And so the cabin stands today, a small log structure on the Crawford Ranch, which is still owned and worked by Quincy and Hannah's descendants. The embroideries hang on the walls, carefully preserved, telling the story of a woman who defended her land alone, and the cowboy who stopped to help her. The piece that hangs above the bed is the one Hannah made first, the one showing Quincy riding toward her cabin on that fateful September night. Along the border in her careful stitches are the words that captured everything. The night Quincy Crawford embroidered himself into my story, September 15, 1883, and in smaller letters below, added years later in slightly shakier stitching, and we stitched a lifetime of love together. The end. And it was perfect. Visitors to the cabin often remark on the craftsmanship of the embroidery, on the beauty of the images. But what they remember most is the feeling the cabin gives them. A sense of peace, of rightness, of true love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Because some love stories are not just about the romance of falling in love. They are about the daily choice to keep loving, through fear and hardship and joy and triumph. They are about partnership and respect and building something together that lasts. Hannah and Quincy's story was one of those. And though they are both long gone now, their story remains, stitched in thread and love, preserved for all who come after to see and remember and be inspired by. The cowboy and the woman embroidering by lamplight. Two souls who found each other in the darkness and created a light that still shines today.